Welcome to Monarchist Minute. I'm your host, William Stout, joined today only by one other host, Watercube. How are you tonight, Watercube?
I'm doing wonderfully. How about you?
Oh, tired. It was a long day, a long week, if I'm being honest. But it was also a good week, and it was my birthday yesterday, so.
Oh, happy belated birthday. I didn't know. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're quite alright, quite alright. But thank you. You know, usually I don't end up, taking my birthday too seriously, or I guess celebrating it too fervently. Normally, I'm doing something having to do with D-Day because I'm a massive history nerd and I care more about that than my own birthday.
Wait, yesterday was June 6th. You share the same birthday as my late mother. And that's how I'd remember it, because her birthday was on D-Day.
I'm sorry about your late mother, but it's interesting how the world works out like that.
Yeah, I didn't mean to put like a damper on the mood, but I mentioned that. I just was like, oh, that's a neat little tidbit.
Oh, no, it's fine. But yeah, I guess you could call it part of my birthday bucket list is, going to Normandy Beach. One of these years, I'll finally do that.
It's worth it. Like, just visiting France in general, as much as like the internet likes to trash talk France, but most of the periphery of France, like anything that's not getting to the central hub of France, is really nice to visit, even outside of the historical value of visiting the area.
I've never actually left the country.
I've been to like France a couple of times. I mostly spent time near Reims, Dijon, and like that sort of region where it's easy to get from Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just nice. People there, a little rude, but still like they're as rude as you would expect someone to be when you're in like a foreign country. Not as nice as the Italians or the Spanish.
Right, French are known for their snobby, we're better than everyone else sort of persona.
Like it was less that, more like you ever like interact awkwardly in the Midwest? Like the French are kind of like standoffish, like how some Midwesterners can be.
You forget I'm from Ohio, so
Oh yeah, you're bordering the Midwest.
I am the Midwest technically. Ohio's the Midwest.
Sure. I'll let you keep your fantasy.
What is that supposed to mean?
Like Ohio is like that. It's like a borderland between Midwest and not, but like I don't know if it's solidly Midwest. Like when I think Midwest, I think Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, some regions of Montana, and also Michigan, of course, Wisconsin.
No. Minnesota is Canada Light. Minnesota is not the Midwest.
Minnesota is the Midwest. I stand by that. Like Minnesota is definitely Midwest. They're like the pinnacle of the ethos, much like Wisconsin.
Wisconsin is Midwestern, but Minnesota. No. I don't. Maybe southern Minnesota. But the further north you get, it just becomes Canada Light.
But like most of the Midwest is Canada Light.
Bite your tongue.
Michigan.
How dare you insult me like that?
Okay, your Great Lakes region has a Canadian vibe to it.
I don't know if we can be friends anymore after that comment.
I don't mean that insultingly. I just mean that as a statement of fact. I say this as someone.
An insult.
Well, that's on you. That's a skill issue.
Skill issue. How?
It's kind of like how Virginia is barely southern, and I will happily admit that. It's like it's southern somewhat, but it's also not that southern at the same time. It's kind of in its own mid-Atlantic culture with the rest of the DMV.
I would say modern Virginia isn't that southern. In the past, it was southern. The problem is that the idea of the southern identity is increasingly receding,
Well,
primarily due to urbanization.
I don't think it's on urbanization specifically, but there's like I think Virginia has always conceptualized itself as the civilized South, even during segregation, because of how they handled the exclusion of African Americans from society, which wasn't good, but they viewed themselves as better than like lynchings down in the deep South. So it always tried to view itself as separate from the South in some ways, even if it still defined itself as Southern.
I don't know. I still think Nova is fundamentally not Southern anymore.
Oh, Nova is like the spawn of hell, the spawn of Satan incarnate.
Hmm.
Like I have a bone to pick with Nova, mostly because they do have a heavy hand in Virginian politics. Like my like big political fantasy is having the 757 region actually unify as a political counterbalance to Nova, because right now it's what Nova, Richmond, the outskirts of Nova that align with Nova, and then Hampton Roads is busy fighting themselves like they're Italian city states.
And now you know how Central Ohioans feel about Columbus.
It tends to be the case in a lot of states where one area is overly prioritized, but it's also somewhat on the other regions for not sticking together. They all undergo kind of like a divide and conquer thing. Even if they're not actively being divided, they will divide themselves.
The issue in Central Ohio is that Columbus is this growing, ever-sprawling weed. And it's literally to the point where it's starting to grow its way 2, 3 counties away.
God bless
So,
suburban sprawl.
I hate it. It really makes me want to go on my Ted Kaczynski arc. Rent has doubled and tripled in my town, and my town was never rich, so.
Yeah, it's all that process of like suburbanization mixed with gentrification. The city I'm in, Newport News, it's right now undergoing its own gentrification in the downtown, which I'm praying doesn't really raise cost of living too much here, but the rent has been going up. There's been a whole debate because we're about the region's about to get an Amazon HQ. So there's debates about infrastructure and housing costs in the region. I was reading a couple articles about it the other day, actually.
Ours is primarily due to Intel moving in. But sprawl has always been an issue. But
It,
I actually plan on, and for those of you who don't know, we're working on writing articles. Some of the members of MOA that might in the future become a MOA newspaper, but right now are just going to be one-shot articles. The first article I want to write is I want to write a piece about rural gentrification in rural communities, and how it's not just an urban issue.
Yeah, that's something that's really neglected, honestly. Like even the left neglects it, which the left's big thing is gentrification. That's their biggest concern because it does price out people, and it oftentimes is discriminatory. It's not always explicitly racist, but there is discrimination. I remember actually watching an interview with or not an interview, it was a TikTok by a guy who's from Appalachia talking about the anti-Appalachian discrimination, like where he's viewed as a hillbilly or a podunk or whatever, and because of that he has faced like housing discrimination when it came to getting a loan or renting a place.
Right. My big thing where I notice gentrification mainly is in two factors. And when I finish the article, everyone in the audience will be able to read it in their own time. But those two factors are primarily, one, it drives up property values and therefore property taxes, and that makes a very hostile environment for farmers, which of course are the backbone of any rural community. And the second reason is that it prioritizes service industries that don't produce good jobs for local residents, but exist to basically subsidize the lifestyles of commuters that don't work in the city they live in, shop in the city they live in, live their lives in the city they live in. And in fact, in some cases, I've heard of isolated cases of people who live 2 or 3 counties away but still enrolling their kids in Columbus City schools. So their kids don't even go to school in the community they live in.
Yeah, like that seems to be one of the biggest common things with the suburban living is, and when they start to infect certain communities, is that they focus on trying to put their kids in the urban center. So the urban center becomes the thing everyone focuses on funding because that's where my kid's going to school. I have more of a connection there than the actual community that I live and reside in.
So this is my big thing is that when they talk about making space for the community or bringing wealth into the community, they're not bringing wealth into the community for the community. They're just spreading out the wealth of the urban center and then basically relegating the community, the natives of that community, as to being a servant class.
Yeah, and it gets almost this feels a little dramatic to say, but like near feudal, where the land, like I don't know where I'm going with this. Like I remember seeing something about an interesting video on how a lot of like local mayors are now taking kind of a feudal approach where they try to annex certain regions just to get the population to subsidize that living. Like these counties that surround Columbus, like being integrated into the Columbus service economy, basically, just as serfs to a middle class bourgeois or like middle class PMCs and then the bourgeois themselves.
If that were to happen, I definitely would have my Ted Kaczynski arc.
Well, it's been something that's slowly been happening throughout most of the United States, where, especially when we made the financial sector our biggest sector of our economy, like it's kind of been a decline for any of the working class or the modern peasantry and the small farm owner. Like it's just been a stark decline. It's also why we have a commercial property bubble. Like no one's using a lot of this land for anything because it's more useful to hold on to the land and either buy land, demolish the property on it, and hold on to the flat lot, or hold on to a commercial building and try to rent it out, or wait for its price to increase enough for them to make a huge profit off of it.
I I despise the idea of a service-based economy because to me it makes no logic. You can't have an economy based solely on people doing a certain thing or providing a certain act because even then that economy is still going to need manufacturing. It's still going to need goods because you're still going to need to produce the resources needed to perform that service. So the idea of a fully service economy is just horrific to me.
It's the consequence of us being a world power and also the power of the American dollar. It's always cheaper to import stuff than it is to make it ourselves at this point because I can pay someone in Pakistan to make bricks for about like 3 cents a day for their labor, and that's a lot of money to them. And I would have to pay someone in the United States at least for it to be worthwhile $15 an hour just so they, can live because it's expensive to live here.
Right. But of course, I would also say that, and I'm gonna talk about this more in a book I plan on writing. I've been writing, and also in possibly another article, that this cycle of cheap foreign labor is not sustainable.
Oh, it's
Because
not.
because as we see that as we ship jobs overseas, that increases the wealth of these countries and helps these countries develop. But when these countries develop, what happens then is that, how do I want to word this?
They become consumers themselves.
Yeah, they become consumers themselves. They stop being cheap labor. So eventually, we're going to deplete our resources in cheap labor.
I don't think you're completely right there because countries like Japan are still major exporters and manufacturing hubs where they've gone through a rise in how much they're making, a rise in how much it costs to live there, and the
Well, to be
shift to service economy, but they still maintain a manufacturing feat. Like I
Well, to be
think
fair, as someone who works in the automation industry, that's because Japan invests heavy in automation. So they've moved away from cheap labor being human to cheap labor being automated and mechanical.
and that's fair. That's fair. One thing
Which
also worth
I will
mentioning. Oh,
admit.
sorry.
Yeah, sorry. And I'm sorry for cutting you off earlier, but which I will admit that will buy us time, of course, until the AI becomes so powerful enough to realize it can bargain for its own labor, and then we're back to square one.
Well, I don't think if we're putting an AI in the automation machines, I think we've already gone way too far as a society, and we've kind of failed but we're probably going to do it because humans aren't really that smart. But I was going to say is the other thing that I think you're failing to consider is how the West, the main consumers of either manufactured goods or really any of the resources, they interact with let's just say sub-Saharan Africa with coups, huge influence in their politics, and trying to keep them down. Like whenever they get a reformer, France oftentimes does a coup. Like Thomas Sankara, who was left-wing nationalist, started reforming Burkina Faso into a somewhat functioning nation state, overthrown. Gaddafi, which love him or hate him, he created a huge amount of progress for the Libyan state as a authoritarian, and he was killed. Like same goes for most anti-imperialist leaders throughout sub-Saharan Africa, and just Africa in general, unless they bend the knee and keep the labor cheap. It's also why we have banana republics. It's the easiest way to keep that cheap labor cheap is through direct oppression along the periphery of the empire.
Right, which is also why I believe that the notion of capitalism creating a prosperous and fair world in the Western world or in the developed world is not a accurate depiction, because the first world, the developed world, did not abolish their oppressive economic models that are based off of the exploitation of cheap labor. Merely, we have just exported them to countries that don't care about their people enough to stop the exploitation.
Yeah, it's the biggest failure of liberal capitalism is it claims to respect human rights, but it doesn't actually. It invented human rights to respect them and then immediately ignored them because it makes the line go down.
Oh, hey, look, Frederick wants up. Come on up, Frederick.
Hello, Frederick.
Yes, I'm sorry that I've been gone. I was having dinner, which is a nice hibachi. So.
Oh, nice.
Oh, hibachi. Very nice.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
fancy.
fried rice and some shrimp.
My town has a couple nice hibachi places. We have a Japanese steakhouse and this other hibachi restaurant that's in a former diner, and it's actually really good. Guilty pleasures.
Yeah.
Hibachi's always great. Oh, sorry.
I'm a real sucker for Asian cuisine. It's my comfort food. If I'm in a bad mood, it's what I go to.
Like, here's the thing: like East Asian, South Asian, most of the Asian foods, like almost all of Asia, just has us like owned on cuisine because they know how to use spices, they know how to use flavor, and they know how to use texture.
Oh yeah.
And what?
I think it got cut out. The internet killed him. They didn't want him to speak his truth, so they silenced him.
Dang bandwidth. But what's your favorite? When you get Chinese food, what's your favorite dish?
Mongolian beef.
Ooh, good choice.
Or beef and broccoli. I really just like the beef. I like the thin strips. It has like a chewy-ish texture to it.
Yeah.
My go-to is sweet and sour chicken. I don't know General Tso's, but nobody ever makes General Tso's the same way, I've noticed.
I can't go for General Tso's. I don't know. So there's something about like I don't really like when they add like the peanuts or anything like that to the meal. I do not like cooked nuts.
My thing always is that they either make it spicy or they make it sweet, but there's no consistency depending on where you go. If that makes sense.
That makes sense.
What? Like, there's no consistency of recipe based on where you get it. Like, General Tso's you buy from one Chinese restaurant can taste completely different from a different one.
Yeah, I think like also a lot of the restaurants try to put on like a specific flavor or specific styling for the dish to make the place seem more appealing, and oftentimes they mess it up.
Hmm. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Like, it's there's this like local what's it called, franchise near me called Sushi King, or well, chain, and it makes really mid sushi. But they also have this like weird, disgusting banana and mayonnaise sushi. And I remember
What?
trying it once.
What is that?
Y'all know
What is?
Grave, right? Like
I heard of
Grave is
California sushi, but that, oh god.
California roll's fine. California roll is okay. It's a little weird, but it's okay. But this was like warm banana with spicy
Oh god.
mayonnaise.
Oh god.
Like, let me get out the thing.
Where do you live? I want to see that.
Uh,
That's very disgraceful to Asians to see that their own culture is being butcherized like that.
oh, it's with crab meat as well.
They put what?
What? What?
No. This is officially a hate crime of a.
Yes, that is a hate crime. That is totally a hate crime if you were to. Oh god.
Oh my lord! No, absolutely not.
Here's the thing: the place is popular because it's also all you can eat sushi. Just see dinner menu.
You see, I don't
Oh
like.
god.
I've tried sushi, and I'll be honest, I don't care for it. Primarily because I don't like seaweed.
I had sushi. It's mid.
I like sushi a lot.
Isn't that I don't like it? But, it's not something that I would have like all the time.
Trying to find
Yeah,
the
I don't.
banana sushi. They might have removed it, as they
I don't
should.
care for sushi. Yeah, as they should. That's a disgrace. It's a crime against God.
Yes,
And
I
decency.
wonder who made that dish because I will be coming after him and I will be questioning his mind right now.
Knowing the person who came out with it, it was probably some white dude with very questionable tastes.
I think they just had extra bananas. Oh wait. No, that's not it. That's spicy imitation crab, cream cheese, and avocado. Where is the banana roll? I might need to go out and ask Grave what the banana roll is. What it was called, if he
Imitation crab
remembers.
is one of those weird foods where I don't know exactly how to take it.
You can just eat it in like a cheese stick. That's how I do it.
Yeah, my thing is I can't figure out what it's supposed to be, like what it's actually made of, because it's not crab, of course, but it
Oh, it's ground up
doesn't
fish.
really taste or.
Ground up fish.
Yeah, no, it's just ground up fish reconstituted into a tube.
Oh.
It's not that bad. It's kind of like a sausage, but like,
Yeah,
no casing.
I've had it before. I just could never put my finger on what it's made of.
Damn.
I'm still trying to find this
So
banana.
terrifying.
So trying to find this affront to culinary arts everywhere.
Like I remember them advertising the orchard roll, love roll.
Bananas, mayonnaise, and sushi? No, absolutely not.
Well,
Affront to God and human decency.
I can find it on DoorDash, but I can fried banana and crunch topped with crab meat and mayo and the chef's special sauce.
oh yeah. Yeah, have you guys
Mayo!
have you guys talked about the D-Day celebration with like Biden? What happened?
No, I didn't pay attention to that. It don't matter. It's Biden.
it's
Biden.
funny because
All
it
I
went
know-
so viral on Twitter that people had to come out and say that it wasn't true. So
What
if
did
you
he
guys
do at-
seen, it looked like Biden was taking a dump, but on stage in front of
All
everybody.
I know about the D-Day celebration, because unfortunately I was at work and I was unable to watch it. All I know is that by the pictures that came from the articles is
Yeah,
that Charles showed up with some.
everybody on Twitter was like, "This man's taking a dump."
Oh,
And
this looks
they
like an
were
old
like
man with
showing a clip of
arthritis.
it. They weren't
I don't-
showing the whole thing. Like he was trying to sit down.
Yeah, like that looks like him just having arthritis. I just checked the video of it. It's like, and that's kind of just sad to watch. It's like watching an old golden retriever struggle to get up. You know what I mean? It's just kind
Yeah.
of sad. It's like I don't want to make fun of the guy for the thing that will eventually consume us all, which is age and time.
Yeah. It's just-
Yeah.
But yeah, like what I was gonna say is the only thing I do know about the D-Day celebration is that King Charles showed up with some mad drip. That's about it.
Oh.
And of course, Graham Smith or whatever his name is, he's not important. He's just some schmuck with no time and no life and likes to badger about the monarchy, even though the king is so much better than he is. Anywho, had a lot to say about how dare the king show up with his fancy smancy medals and uniform and how he didn't earn any of the medals and blah 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 blah. You know how it is.
Oh god. The former Queen could have received medals because I believe she participated in helping her own
Medals
country.
from her participation, and they were her medals.
Yeah.
Even
She
like
wore
Edward
her
VIII
medals
participated
today.
in World War II. They didn't trust him, but then he participated. I think it was
They
Ed VIII.
participated.
Who's the one that abdicated? I should know this. The one that had like pro-German ideations.
I
Yeah.
can't remember.
Married the divorcee.
think
That
so.
was George VI's brother. I forget his name.
Was it Edward VIII? It was Edward
I think it was
V.
Edward VIII.
Yeah. Even he was like a major general, and he did frontline duty in World War One, or tried to do frontline duty, and he also served in World War II. So he could have just shown up. It would have been kind of weird. Like he had medals he earned.
Yeah,
Like,
we don't talk about it. I thought Edward VIII is long dead.
oh yeah, no, I more mean like hypothetically.
Yeah.
Like
But,
all these people are valid to show up at these events, especially as a state sovereign. I don't know why anyone would make a big deal out of it.
because he's a monarch and my elected government official or elected representative. You know, this is the main thing I hate about Republic UK. All of their talking points could just immediately be invalidated by just saying, and the exact same thing would happen if they had an elected head of state. Like, oh, look at the king spending so much money on a security detail. Like, do you not think a president of the UK wouldn't have a security detail? Or
Yeah.
look at the king spending a bunch of money traveling to meet with foreign dignitaries or go to these fancy smancy parties and galas, as if a president of the UK would not go to fancy smancy parties and galas.
It's the assumption that the monarch being a monarch makes him immoral, like compared to, hey, state sovereigns need to flex power regardless of it's Republican or not or whatever it is, because like that's how states work.
Yeah,
States derive legitimacy by flexing strength.
And
Yeah,
honestly,
that's also what one meme said, like anti-monarchist when the king spends money on his coronation, and then anti-monarchist when the president uses taxpayer money on like vacation and stuff.
Exactly.
Trump golfing on the American dime. Like we literally just had Trump. We just showed how republics don't really work by the guy who was literally just, business mogul from New York. Like, come on.
Yeah, we're gonna get do some golf.
I really hate golf. Golf, to me, is the biggest... Okay, I'm about to go on a rant.
Well,
so I'm sorry, but
golf. A lot of people do golf, including businessmen, politicians, and all that. So
yeah, all the people that should be shot. Smile.
So the people that should be
For legal reasons, that is
bro, you shouldn't be saying that on live.
I will say the funny in Minecraft, whatever the fuck. We didn't name names. It's fine.
Legal reasons, that's a joke.
Yeah, what's the worst that can
clearly
happen?
I said smile after it. That's like that should be enough of a guarantee of sarcasm. Chasm.
But anyway,
yeah, sorry, continue about golf.
What was I gonna say? But the amount of space we waste on golf courses drives me up the wall.
Not just space, water. All that water.
Yes. Like, I love listening to Californians complain about how they have to ration the water. It's like, my brother in Christ, you live in neighborhoods with private golf courses where half of your neighborhood is in itself a golf course. Gee, where's all your water? Maybe get rid of your grass. I don't know. It's really hard for me not to curse right now because I kind of want to.
The yard culture and like the travesty it's brought upon our ecology is something that's really understated. Like
eat grass. Like, my plan for my yard is that I'm gonna rip out all my grass and replace it with something like clover, something that has flowers and is better for the environment and isn't just,
I was just gonna rip up my. I was thinking about that my lawn because it's like not so green anymore. So,
like, if I wasn't renting, I would happily replace it with moss, clover, or something. Like, actually, Flame You guy.
Just rip the vein off and then just put new green grass on it.
Flame You Guy actually recently wrote an article about his local town's like situation where the universities are buying up a bunch of land, right? Demolishing the stuff on it so they don't have to pay property tax on it and not allowing anything to grow. So it's just these open green grass spaces that they maintain that to look kind of pretty. And it's like animals aren't allowed to, like, there's no wildflowers, there's no nothing. It's just kind of these dead zones throughout his city.
It sounds like a wonderful argument for Georgism.
He quoted George in the article.
Georgism stream.
I am 120% for land value taxes, and because
it's the best land on earth, we're gonna tax it.
And my main reason for land value tax is because as someone from a post-industrial Rust Belt city, we have so many empty lots where factories used to be, and many of them are still owned by the corporations that had factories on them. Either that or they're owned by private landowners and they just sit there. And I would love for us to tax the hell out of whoever owns these lots for not doing anything with them.
Everybody works
some of those
except
lots
the empty
are turned
plot.
into like museums and stuff.
Not really, barely ever. Like, they're not developed. It's not worth developing them because you have to pay more tax on them. It's better to own an empty lot of land than it is to own a house in our economy, with how our economy is structured. Everybody works except the empty lot.
Flat piece of land and you'll be fine.
Like, you can like see that as well. Like, I've looked into purchasing land on like multiple occasions. It tends to be like $7 to $20,000 for a couple, like either a half acre to a couple of acres of land. And if there's anything on that land, that price immediately skyrockets into the 100K range. And even if it's like half an acre.
And then they wonder why people leave their houses to rot, and landlords intentionally let their homes and properties that they run out get run down. It saves money on their taxes. There's an easy way to fix this, and that's we actually have sensible taxes that
taxing based on the land value.
Penalize people for improving their properties.
It's very much anti-development. Like, it actually kind of plays into the manufacturing parts of the American economy, where we don't encourage development, including the very draconian zoning laws that we have as well.
Don't get me started on zoning laws.
Like, if we had zoning and LVT together, we'd have some dynamism in local economies, but that point forward, like, we're just gonna continue stagnation on local front until the commercial bubble pops, and then we will learn nothing from it. Like, we learned nothing from 2008, and like how we learned nothing from Enron.
And of course, I think not just bikes quoted Strong Towns in one of his videos about how urban development is a Ponzi scheme. That being that the more you put into, I mean, not what I'm forgetting my words here. Suburban development is a Ponzi scheme because you have to create more suburban development in order to fund the repairs to the original development.
Yeah. It's something where it's never built to last. America has stopped building buildings to last because
We've stopped building anything to last, to be honest.
Oh yeah, no, we have entered the age of intentional obsolescence. Like the
Planned
iPhone
obsolescence and its consequences have been a disaster for mankind.
It's the issue where it's so much more profitable to make sure something goes down. It's also with the shrinkflation that we've been seeing. Like I think Walgreens and a whole bunch of other companies just straight up recently came out and said, "Yeah, no, we just raised the prices on everything with the excuse of inflation. We just wanted to make more money." And now they're starting to lower prices again because people stopped shopping there. Because here's the thing with the American bourgeois: they get greedy and they get greedy fast, and they don't think about the long-term consequences. It's again how we ended up in 2008 with the recession is because of how CDOs played out, because a lot of them were suboptimal bonds.
American bourgeois are very ambitious and enterprising people, but they lack a long-term thought and consideration to make them successful.
Well, I don't even call them ambitious. Like, for the most part, the bourgeois tend to be playing it safe. It's safer to raise the price of a burger by 20 cents than it is to, try to innovate and make the process of getting that burger faster. But at some point, you reach the pinnacle of innovation when it comes down to a certain field of the economy, and you can't improve it anymore. So all you have left is to raise prices.
Someone said that most people don't think about the long term.
I would say
people don't think on the long term. That's true for most of humanity, right? We have the lizard brain going on, but the other part of it is that the American bourgeois, who pride themselves on being the smart people in society, they're the smartest guys in the room. They know how the economy works, but they really don't. Most of the time, they're just kind of malarkeying about, but they want to act like they're thinking long term. They want to present that, like the Elon Musk cult around him shows how people kind of hold the bourgeois to a high degree. There's also whole things around, what was that guy, big commentator on stocks on TV? Do not remember his name for the life of me. He would yell all the time. Like, people held his words like they were gold in their hands.
I remember him. I know who you're talking about now.
Yeah, like,
his name, though. He was like Frank or Fred or something. He had some really generic name. But to backtrack the lawns, the Monarchist said the origin of lawn culture had to do with nobles showing off basically wasted land, saying, "Oh yeah, I don't need to farm this land, so I just have it sit there and be green."
Yeah,
which
it's just be green.
It's
just now conservation.
I've actually seen an alternate version of this story where it actually doesn't go. It goes back to something similar. The idea of the yard, it goes back not to the idea of nobles flexing that they don't need to farm their land, but it goes back to recreating the idea of pastoralism. It's the idea of
surrounded by nature while in a suburban environment.
The only problem is that it's an intentionally sterilized version of nature.
We do like our sterilized world. Like, I think everyone's noticed how drab all the colors have gotten when it comes down to how we portray the world. Like, the iPhone and Apple products were kind of the first wave of this. They used to be very colorful, and then they slowly just became black, gray, sometimes white. Same with cars. Most cars are black, gray, and white.
Yeah.
And I kind of had this thought when we got to remember the whole man versus bear question.
Yeah.
And I kind of had this thought. It's like the only reason we're actually having this question is because our idea of nature has become so sterilized and basically romanticized that people will never understand just how dangerous a bear would be. Now, granted, I would rather run into a bear in the woods than a random dude in the woods. But the reason now, hang on a second. The reason I say that is because I'm actually an outdoorsman. When I say in the woods, I mean in the woods. I don't mean in some metro park on a paved walking path through nature. I mean 30, 40 miles out in the middle of nowhere, far away from the next human being. Which, if I just so happen to run into a dude that also just happens to be this deep in BFE with me, I'm going to sit there and wonder, why is someone else this far out here?
Like, here's the thing with the man.
What I'm trying to say is, when it comes to the question, would you rather meet a man or a bear in the middle of the woods? I would be the man in the middle of the woods that you'd run into. Just a random dude that's, like, out there.
I think the value of the question, though, like, is more in a bear is a bit more predictable because we can at least analyze it a bit more than a human with psychology and desire, because, like, especially a man, because that was posited by women, which a lot of women do live in a state of fear, especially with how, one, our society encourages fear to begin with, but also men are the brunt majority of, like, sexual offenders in our society, which is, like, I think it was more critiquing, like, I can't predict what a man would do to me, but I know what a bear would do to me. A mauling is at least something that's a predictable outcome compared to, will this guy just talk to me or will this guy try to rape me?
Right, but some women really took it too seriously and really created this, like, romanticized idea. It's like, oh, the bear would just mind his business, or I would get along with the bear. And it's like, really?
It's
Which is why I thought the retort that men came up with was hilarious. The whole, would you rather share your feelings with a woman or with a tree?
Which, here's the thing that I found beautiful about that retort. They're both critiques of toxic masculinity and, like, the patriarchal system, where both, like, the men being hesitant to share their feelings is a byproduct of toxic masculinity, especially how women internalize that and view men as the only, like, source of strength. And the man versus bear one shows, like, the toxic masculinity where men are been basically conditioned to be very libidinal creatures first and foremost, so you have to fear them for what they might do.
And,
like,
and I've had this, while we're on kind of on the topic of equality of the sexes and gender roles and stuff, I've had this thought as of reason, and the reason that it seems that equality of the sexes has been stuck as of late is because we've reached a point where in breaking down the quote unquote patriarchy where men have reached a point where we're done giving up our privilege, but women have not been ready yet to give up the privileges that they get when it comes to the patriarchy.
Well, like,
I guess what I'm trying to say is, men have been forced to give up on trying to enforce stereotypical gender norms on the women, but women are not ready to give up enforcing stereotypical gender norms on men.
I think it goes a bit further than that, because, like, it's not just men being unwilling to give things up or reaching the point where they no longer wish to. It's also that when it came down to defeating the patriarchy, most of that was attached to the confine of women taking up the responsibilities of men, where they are to become men compared to abolishing the gender roles entirely. It's not a removal of it, it's just a sublation of what would be viewed as femininity into masculinity. Where, like, instead of it being like, oh, okay, anyone's allowed to try to embrace a certain worldview or, like, present themselves in a certain way, it's about women should be like men. They should be as strong as men in the same social context. As they should not have their own conceptualizations of femininity or their own, like, conceptualizations of self. They have to operate in the framework where if you want to get ahead and be above the patriarchy, you have to embrace the goals and standards that patriarchy sets for men.
So you think the problem is we're trying to make women become men rather than free both men and women to be themselves?
Yes.
Yes,
I can agree with that.
And that's kind of like a bad precedent at that point.
What do you mean?
Really?
But the fact is that yeah. this whole feminism stuff is just, like we had some good stuff come out of it, but a lot of it is just like not good for
Well, it's a lot of
society.
it is like third wave feminism trying to correct the failures of second wave, which second wave was a lot of that encouraging women to take up more masculine roles. It's not that women should only be in feminine roles or whatever. I'm not saying that, but it's that it's an encouragement of masculinity for all members of the society, which that masculinity from the get-go, especially under liberal capitalism, is toxic. It hurts everyone involved. Like, a man cannot express his feelings, even though, like, in history, men were able to be emotional creatures. In feudalism, slave society, whatever, before capitalism, they were allowed to be emotional without it being a huge taint on their soul.
The only thing in this case feminism has succeeded in doing is making women subject to the same exploitation as men were subject to under capitalism.
Yes, and maybe add on top of that, like, some benefits where it's like they have some more legal protections now, which is honestly a good thing. Like, marital rape should be illegal and stuff like that. I think that's like a no-brainer. Child marriage as well.
My other issue with contemporary feminism, it's too nihilistic or materialistic, but that's generally just me as a critique of society. Like, the whole live free kind of, like, the whole thing about slut shaming. The entire point of slut shaming, being against slut shaming, misses the point. The point isn't about stopping people for judging people for their sexual habits. The point about slut shaming is telling people that their lifestyle is not healthy, mentally or physically. That's why we do it.
I disagree there, because oftentimes slut shaming always borders on body shaming as well. Like, I went to in high school, and there was this girl, and she had, unfortunately for her, a attractive body, and she would get slut shamed for it, but she never slept around. She didn't do any of that sort of stuff, but all the guys would make rumors about her and try to shame her for it because she just happened to have, like, wide hips and a cute face. That was her sin.
Yeah, that's sadly the reality of society. You assume people before you even talk to them.
I would not
like,
consider that slut shaming necessarily, because you're not. While that is making rumors and that is awful in its own way, I would not consider that slut shaming. When I say slut shaming, I mean specifically targeting someone or commenting someone because they're overly promiscuous, not making up rumors, just specifically targeting someone for being overly promiscuous, which is the thing that a lot of people are complaining about.
Well, a lot of it is because, like, when you go after someone promiscuous, there's stereotypes that you make about that person, about how that person dresses and so on, that bleeds over. Like, again, this girl, like, having a nice body and having, like, being attractive, like, it was, people directly called her a slut for it, and they would, like, directly treat her as such, as if she was promiscuous, because they see someone who is attractive and assume they are promiscuous, especially in high school, in college, and stuff like that.
And that's not fair to her at all.
Yeah, and it's something that actually a lot of the third wave feminists were railing against, because they were talking about the stereotyping around it. It wasn't just about critiquing promiscuity, but it was about critiquing how men tend to view women in certain ways as inherently promiscuous.
Yeah, for example, the body count idea.
Like, the thing is that a lot of it, like, where I agree with the third wave feminists, is where men tend to view women initially as sexual creatures and then humans later. Like, there's oftentimes cases where they view them as humans first, but it always, like, a lot. I witnessed it.
Not married couples. No. Not married couples.
Not well-adjusted men, at least.
Which most men, especially under liberal capitalism, which is alienating, are not well-adjusted and also encouraged to consume. Like, we live in a neurotic society, and it will be consistently neurotic.
Yeah, you're currently living in an age where, essentially, certain, stuff that, is accessible to everybody.
Yeah, like ranging, like you can blame porn for it, but like the thing is, it ranges all over the place on the causes because also some of the stuff is passed down. Like I remember hearing someone's dad at high school like even refer to the girl as a slut. Like it ranges.
Oh,
There's
God.
a whole bunch of like stuff where this is a societal issue, which
I'm sorry, but if a grown man calls a high school girl a slut, you should be able to walk right up to him and call him a pedophile. I don't care.
Well, that's the other part about it is that there's a huge like with the undercurrent of libidinal energy in the
I'm sure women say that too to other women.
Oh yeah, no. Well, it becomes internalized in women as well. That's why there's the whole concept of the pick-me. The pick-me is a woman who has internalized misogyny to the point where she then externalizes it onto other women.
Or it could just be that she's jealous of the other woman, and you know.
Now,
it can range everywhere. It can be a whole bunch of different points, but oftentimes, if she's jealous, she can also use internalized misogyny as a weapon and a sword to get the insults to attack that other woman. It's
now, of course, if not to derail your thought, Watercube, but if you want to finish your thought.
Well, I don't really have much more to add than it's like this is a systemic issue in society, and I understand third wave feminism's critiques, especially around slut shaming, which did reach an apex. There's also one thing I'd want to mention is an undercurrent of pedophilia where there's a lot of men who will view younger women, even women, or well, children, as sexual creatures. There's a whole neuroticism about, a girl can't wear sweatpants in high school or yoga pants or whatever the fuck comfortable clothing because, that is sexual. That is inherently sexual. Like, no, it's only sexual because you make it sexual.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there is this one comment, there's one thought I had about such having, and my main critiques around third wave feminism don't necessarily have to do with their ideas, just how third wave feminists act and present themselves, and that I find them extremely toxic a lot of times. But
and
one of those things,
they also say it in a way that completely makes it where they like hate men to the point.
There seem to be a lot of misandry in modern feminism. But Frederick, if I was going to finish, one of those things I've noticed, and this also comes into the topic of slut shaming, is that we seem to have, at some point, the irony seems to be lost at them that one of their favorite insults to call their critics is, they like to call them virgins or incels. And this is my point, is that if it's not okay to shame a woman for being overly promiscuous, is it okay to use someone's lack of promiscuity or someone's virginity as an insult either?
I think that also one thing I'd like to mention with that is that there's a pervasive ideology throughout most of the world. It's liberal capitalism, throw in all the patriarchal stuff on top of that, where even the third wave feminist who is solidly a third wave feminist still has that toxic masculinity that they've internalized inside of them. And those insults are that just eeping out. It's hard to purge that entire ideology from your system. Even the most devout communist will still have liberal ideations around human rights.
Mm.
It's a matter of ideological development and the context where you grow up ideologically. Even like the most tradcath devout monarchist here will probably have some liberal ideation in their soul, and I'll bet good money on that.
Yeah, it's just what I've noticed, and it made sense to me. It's like, if we shouldn't be allowed to shame a woman for sleeping around, then why would you be allowed to, say, shame a man for being lonely and having no sexual partners or experience?
The real comedy of it is the origin of the word incel.
Like
the incel was originally incel was originally a lesbian word.
Because if a man hasn't had sex and they're waiting for marriage, then that should be like a badge of honor.
That should be. I do.
Well, that's also a society that values marriage, which our society has kind of made marriage outmoded since the rise of industrial capitalism. Capitalism seeks to destroy the family inherently on how it operates.
But anyway, what were you saying about incel being originally a lesbian term?
It was come up by a lesbian woman to try to describe the issues of dating inside the lesbian world, where she was involuntarily celibate even though she wanted to be sexually active, and then it got reappropriated by the modern day incel movement. The main reason why I think incel is also used as an insult specifically, virgin is that toxic masculinity coming out, but incels like is more, especially with people like Elliot Rodgers and the more extreme misogynist movements that have come out. Like incel has been associated with very volatile misogyny. Like, again, Elliot Rodgers comes to mind, and how a lot of mass shooters that would self-described as incels looked at Elliot Rodgers as an example on who to follow.
I see. Yeah, it's just, I am not satisfied with feminism in its modern state, primarily because, like I said, there seems to be a lot of misandry,
it was done for like a good cause, but now it's just seen as like a bad thing.
And like I said at the start of our conversation, I feel like that's because we've gotten to the point where we as men have given up our privilege so that women can live better, more equitable lives. But now it's time. But now women have gotten to the point, well, we as a society have gotten to the point where it's women's turn to give up those privileges that they got from the patriarchy, from traditional gender norms, and they're not willing to do it.
Well, here's the thing actually about that specifically. It's where the trans movement plays into it, where the trans movement is directly challenging third wave feminism on overcoming and giving up those privileges that they gained under like toxic masculinity and the patriarchal system as it stands. Where the trans movement... Wait, what?
Do explain. Keep going.
Where the trans movement with new gender identities, ranging from like people being non-binary, people being like female to male trans people, male to female trans people, like makes the feminist have to reconsider how they view gender roles, because there's a whole kind of reaction going on in the feminist movement with the rise of TERFs, SWERFs, whatever other grouping you want to think about, like where they end up reinventing and trying to reinvigorate the gender norms, because they realized if I have to give up my privileges, I should probably go revert back to some more traditional thinking. And it's especially common in TERFs, because a lot of TERFs eventually become right-wingish influencers in the social, the social realm. I'm trying to think of some other good examples of this, but I've seen it often enough. I should have something on hand. And
I do have critiques of the trans movement in general, primarily in that I think it's become, in some cases, a social contagion, where it's become trendy or fashionable to say you're trans, and this distracts from...
It's like the fashion, like, stuff.
Well, it's like
the next thing is like trendable to the next thing, right?
Yeah, and this distracts from... because... yes, trans people have existed for a while, and even if we go back to the 90s and early 2000s, references to trans people existed in media. But to the scale and to the way it's presented back then versus the way it's presented now is so different. And honestly, I think the way it was presented back then seems so much more genuine, where these people are... today, I'm trying to think of a way to explain it. The way trans people are depicted today versus how they were depicted back then, as someone who just wants to live as the opposite sex versus... I don't know.
Oh, just wait till like robots come around. Then people will like cut off their body parts, but robots.
I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't like the subculture that is developed around the trans community. This whole cultural phenomenon that has come along with it.
Here's the thing, that's been in evolution since like the 1960s. Here's the thing, like with the early 2000s, with the portrayal of trans people, it tended to be a lot more on the discriminatory side of things. Like, I'm looking at media, it was better for trans people to exist. Not better, but like they got more respectable media presentation, like back in the 60s. Like, I remember someone who was, I think, a veteran from either Korea or World War II had a sex change operation, and it was like this famous article, or now famous in the trans community, of like G.I. Joe becomes blonde beauty, and it treated her very respectfully. But when it got to the 90s and 2000s, also when we reached the peak of homophobia as well, and also the peak of eating disorders too. But like,
I wonder if there's a conflation between those two.
There's a little bit, actually. There's also a huge eating disorder issue inside the trans community as well, because of toxic femininity as well as toxic masculinity. But like, the issue is, I don't remember where I was going with this, is that the trans community now, like the culture there, it'll eventually grow out of that culture, because a lot of the fight now is over like medicinal rights. Because back in, let's just say, the 80s and 90s, if you wanted to have a sex change operation, there was like one guy who did it. He was across the border in Mexico, and he did not give good surgeries. Most of his customers were trans people that were people of color and sex workers, because oftentimes they got kicked out of their house and forced to live on the street. Like, the majority of trans women are sex workers, like turning tricks on the street because they're excluded from their families. Most of what we see online and most of what we see elsewhere, it tends to be the vocal minority compared to the majority that tends to be constantly suffering. And I think that's something that we kind of fail to appreciate, especially when it comes to people on the right wing who look in at the trans community and only see the white trans girl that lives in the suburbs. But the fight for medical care has been huge for them because, again, the guy who did a lot of these surgeries, he basically just butchered people because he didn't give a shit. He would just do whatever the fuck he could to get money out of them. He, like, amputated some guy who had an amputee fetish just for the sake of doing it because he got like $100,000 out of it. Like, there's been great inhumanity shown towards trans people.
And that makes sense, but again, I go back to the whole issue of the social contagion and how, in many ways, this is becoming a very dangerous trend, especially because there are people pushing to let minors do with it now, and we don't know what the long-term consequences for, like, puberty blockers. Like, there was a study that came out of Sweden, and of course I trust this study because Sweden is a very, very progressive country, and if they're saying that they're nervous about minors taking puberty blockers, that says something.
Yeah, there's not enough research done.
Very extreme issues with bone density development as a result. And so, and this whole thing with the social contagion and going too far is that it's getting into the minds of kids, impressionable children, and I think this is dangerous because these children don't necessarily understand the ramifications of these decisions of these lifestyle choices.
When it comes to minors with HRT or puberty blockers or whatever, I just feel as if there's not enough research done, but I also, like, at this point, like, it's okay to inform a child that a trans person exists just as much as it's okay to inform them that a gay person exists, in my mind.
Yeah. Right, and I'm not saying they should be sheltered. I'm just saying no one under 18 should be permitted to engage in these.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like these kids that want to do this, they don't know what they're getting into until it's too late.
Well, it's also, like, one thing that needs to be mentioned is that there's also a lack of research on dysphoria. Like, once we start understanding gender dysphoria, we can actually look towards minors. Like, if they actually exhibit. What?
That is not a condition.
It's
gotta be some made up stuff.
Yeah, okay, and you're gonna call PTSD made up next?
No.
They're very similar and related. Dysphoria, PTSD, and also anorexia all are dysphoric in different ways. They all are dissociative in different ways. That's why I have a lot more sympathy, like, especially when it comes down to someone struggling with dysphoria and dysmorphia, than like I probably would have if I didn't have PTSD, because I can understand what it's like to not feel your own body.
And that's one of the reasons why I kind of hate those people who are in the trans movement and the trans community who want to say gender dysphoria is not a mental illness. I'm sorry, it quite literally is, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if you say it is, you're putting medical levity on the issue, and isn't that what you want?
Yeah, like
medical legitimacy?
Like, when it comes down to dysphoria, oftentimes like the thing that's proposed to help treat it is transition itself, because it can help alleviate the suffering. It's like PTSD. You have to fight and come up with coping mechanisms to deal with the PTSD.
I know. I'm just saying. It's like if you stop, and like I said, it goes back to the whole. I don't like the idea of trans culture and like the subculture and how it's become like socially fashionable. If we treated it in a medically acceptable way and as a medical issue rather than a social issue, I'd be much more okay with it.
Well, the issue is that the social and the mental are very much overlapping. Like, we do not treat schizophrenics well. We do not treat people with dissociative disorder well. We don't treat people who have sociopathy and psychopathy well. Like, and it's because of how our society views mental illness, and it also is viewed as something that's not profitable by the liberal capitalist system.
Tetsuke's wanted up for a while, so I'm gonna let him up. Tetsuke, welcome up. I hope I'm pronouncing your username correctly.
No, that's correct.
Hello, Tetsuke. On your point in the chat about like when it comes down to surgery tends to be a huge alleviation. I needed to get like when it comes down to anything where it has to do with the physical body and issues with the physical body. Like, I'm going to use myself as an example. I'm not trans, but I had to go through removing of scars because scars would exacerbate my PTSD. My scarring, looking at my scar tissue, would cause me great pain because it would bring me back to when I was on fire and suffering there. Oh. It's the same exact process when it comes down to bottom surgery with a trans woman, or top surgery when it comes down to a trans man. It's about removing those things because those things cause mental anguish to a huge degree, and they're not that invasive. Like, they're invasive surgeries, but they aren't permanently harmful.
Well, I'm going to say that, well, the permanently harmful thing when it comes to trans people, I would have to disagree, because the fact of the matter is that many of these surgeries, like you said, they are incredibly invasive. They're not necessarily able to be reversed, at least in some cases when it comes to, say, a man having his twigs and berries taken off. So I'm going to have to disagree with that. But the reason I said... and I'll have to check again. Hold on. Yeah. So the whole surgery thing makes little sense to me in regards to there aren't very many mental illnesses that I know of. And to be fair, this is just more my personal understanding of the matter. You said scars were something you had to deal with.
Yes.
And at least in that sense, I can kind of understand where you're coming from. But I do have to ask, how exactly does that surgery for you work? Because I know that there are certain mental illnesses, like, actually, y'all brought it up not too long ago, the man in Mexico who chopped somebody up because somebody had a fetish for being dismembered or having their arm cut off. That's something in the medical world, at least to my understanding, isn't allowed. So I find it just kind of strange, and again, this is just my understanding of it. Why would it be allowed for somebody to basically chop themselves up when, like you actually stated earlier on, there's not really a whole lot of information on this? Like, there's not really been long-term study on this, and a lot of people, at least from what I've seen, at least as they get older, have a really hard time running with it. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't people who, aren't happy when they get these surgeries, but the long-term health risk, and I guess you could say is like, yeah, these people are making that choice, but like I've stated earlier about at least when it comes to kids or, teenagers, these kids or these individuals in general oftentimes don't seem like they have a full idea of what they're actually getting into.
When it comes down to children, scary. When it comes to children, I don't really touch the subject because, again, I feel as if there's not enough research to properly diagnose. Like, there's a way to diagnose dysmorphia and dysphoria when it comes down to gender identity, but it's hard to fully get it down pat. But when it comes down to the value of the surgery, especially bottom surgery, it's shown to decrease suicidal ideations in trans people by about 30%. And that's 90%.
To be honest with you, I think there should be more alternatives to that, like being comfortable under your own skin.
Well, here's the thing.
Sorry.
Well, I would say that goes back to what Watercube was also saying, that in order to do that, we need more research.
Well, and also one of the things is before bottom surgery, HRT, and all these things are even considered, there's about like 3 years of therapy that you have to go through to figure out if that's meant for you.
Well, and that's actually something I kind of have a problem with, because I think I've mentioned it before that I know someone personally who has gender dysphoria, but they've actually just seen it as that what it actually is, and them just seeing themselves that way, not actually being that way. So they've actually learned to live with that understanding. They're a woman, but they see themselves as a man, but they consider themselves a woman because logically that's what they are. The fact of the matter is, though, that's their mentality. And I know we had a discussion about that before, but what I'm getting at is that they went into therapy, but their therapist was constantly pushing them to get the surgery when they themselves were like, no, that doesn't make any actual sense. Like, why would I do this to myself when I am what I am? Even if my mind sees this the way it is, it's not true.
Yeah.
And I know it's not true because I can look at it in a mirror.
Okay.
Again, we had this discussion. You brought up that the mirror is kind of the point, but at least in this case, obviously not in every case, because some people are probably just too far gone at that point, but people are being pushed to do this when it makes very little sense in cases. So I'm not saying there aren't people who don't actually need it, but like y'all said before, there is not nearly enough information, at least as far as I know, because I have been looking into this since our last discussion. It just really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. There's really not nearly enough information on this to justify doing what's actually being done, at least as far as I'm concerned.
So it seems to me that at least the one thing we can all agree on is that there needs to be extensively more research.
Yeah, one thing I'd want to address with that is that gender dysmorphia and gender dysphoria, like in the case of your friend probably had moderate gender dysphoria. There's some extents of it where people go out of their way to do self-harm in attempt to remove their genitalia because it feels so alienating to have on their body.
No, she actually attempted that, but I'm not entirely sure how to describe it. I would actually have to have her do it justice because she gave pretty vivid detail on that. But to put it plainly, when she actually attempted it, she stopped because it took her a second to realize what she was actually doing. And when she looked in the mirror again, like I said, I'm not really doing it justice. She gave it a better idea of it, but basically I guess it's in a sense like how, and I actually do have a personal stake on this claim when it comes to suicide attempts, where you try to cut yourself or you even cut yourself and you realize immediately what you're doing is completely and utterly absurd.
Some people just don't have that realization, though. Like, that's the other thing you need to factor in is that...
No, obviously. That's why I said, like, when it comes right down to it, it's like there are people who probably do need this. The unfortunate thing is, and like William was stating earlier, it's just, this is being pushed on people. And it was pushed on my friend. So I have there are people who need it, but it's not being done justice when this is being pushed on people who either don't need it or who may very well just grow out of it, because that is actually something I have found, that this actually is something that some people actually just slowly ebb away at.
I get your hesitancy.
And
I
people
understand it.
with like other conditions might be pushed to do it.
Well, here's the thing,
this is something I'm very concerned about as someone with autism, is that there's increasingly an overlap between people with autism and people who are being diagnosed with gender dysphoria or being convinced that they're trans because they don't. Well, as someone with autism, we already struggle with conforming with social norms, and usually we end up just dropping them entirely. So, convincing someone that they're the wrong sex or the opposite sex or that their gender identity is different is easy, but the unintended consequence of them then seeking treatment is that some of the treatments end up sterilizing them, and so it's low-key unintentional eugenics. It ends up being unintentional eugenics against autistic people.
Oh, actually, I do have a point on that. I have a friend who she's intersex and autistic, and with the specific condition of her being intersex caused her to look a lot into these issues, and she noticed the exact same thing. One thing I think that's a huge underlying issue in this whole discussion is the medical industrial complex. Like, there's a whole thing, especially in the United States, where people who may or may not be fully sick are encouraged to buy medicine, get treatments, and so on when the issue is either moderate or something they can overcome themselves. Like, again, HRT, gender I'm sorry.
I would 110% agree with you on that.
Like, especially with how our healthcare is set up, especially with how most of our system is set up, it encourages people to be viewed as something to be sold to compared to someone that needs treatment for something. It's why there's also overzealous prescriptions, It's why we had the opium epidemic or the opiate epidemic throughout the United States. It's from overprescription of painkillers. Like, the trans issue is affected by that heavily because, one, it's a small group of people. It's two, like, becoming socially trendy to be very accepting towards them, which, like, isn't always a negative, but it's something that feeds into the medical industrial complex, and it's also somewhat pinkwashing of the medical industrial complex.
Yeah, and my main concern isn't that the social trendiness is making people more friendly to them, because of course we should be more friendly. As a good Christian, we should treat these people with kindness and charity. It would be wrong for us to not.
I mean, to be fair, like, just basic human decency, I think, is just good enough, but yeah.
Yeah, but my concern is not that the social condition is making it more successful, is that the social trendiness is actively encouraging people to seek out becoming trans or transitioning as some sort of fashion statement.
I feel as if the era of trans trenders has been on the decline, especially like trans trenders, egg culture and all that has been on a stark decline as the trans movement has matured, because it has become something larger. Like, there are people who can fall into those brackets, but it's like it's becoming less common, at least from what I've perceived, especially looking at my local communities of trans people.
Granted, I guess, of course, it goes back to the whole one crow is louder than 100 sparrows, and just because the trans trenders might be more vocal then.
Yeah, and it's also, there's a reaction inside of the trans community right now where people are now fighting against internal discrimination. Like, non-binary people are now, like, fighting against being viewed as woman light, which they've been treated as for a while.
What is woman light?
Yeah. Like, woman light, like, they're treated basically as something feminine or like a woman, but, you know, they're just, you know, not a woman, but they are basically a woman. It's trust.
Now, hang on a second. To back up a little bit, you said both dysmorphia and dysphoria. Is there a difference, or was that a mistake of wording?
There is a difference. I don't like gender. Dysmorphia is more in line with stuff like anorexia, I believe. Anorexia, bulimia, and so on. Dysphoria is where it's a direct disconnect inside the body and mind. I do not know the exact medical difference in my brain. I remember researching it a while ago, but I can't pull it, like, the definition out of the top of my head.
Now, I am very okay with trans people, and I generally, while I don't necessarily agree with it, I support their decisions that they make with their bodies, because ultimately it's not my business. But I draw the line explicitly at the issue of non-binary and neopronouns and all these, like, different genders.
Oh, I'm a big fan of those.
In the lens of an Orthodox Christian, it's like taking a tattoo, right? Because, you know, tattoos are kind of like a bad thing, right? Because your whole body is like a temple, right? So, you know, it's supposed to be like a temple for, like, the Holy Spirit, and when you damage the temple, you know.
And that's why I say, it's not that I don't approve of it, but ultimately it's not my decision, and I don't have any power to make it.
When it comes down to neopronouns, I'm okay with those. Only for the sake of it inches closer to gender abolition, which is my position on the gender issue. I would like to abolish gender as a social mechanism.
Unfortunately, that's I don't want to sound rude, but that just seems really weird to say simply because gender is just language to describe what we are.
It's just
it goes beyond that.
It's been
Gentlemen, one at a time.
I'm sorry. But no, it's just like man is a male, a woman is a female. It is what we are. I mean that's kind of the whole thing. It's language, but it's language that describes, well, like I said, what we are. I mean, you can say that we shouldn't have those definitions, but then what are we doing? What do we call ourselves? That makes no sense.
We're going to get into the argument about whether or not gender is separate from sex, which I would say fundamentally it's not.
I'd say it is, mostly due to the fact that, if you're looking at this, that's okay from a specifically English linguistic perspective, but there's a plethora of other languages that have other gender constructs that are outside the male-female divide that English tends to use to as a default. Most Indo-Europeans use it as a default. But when it comes down to other language families and other linguistic groups, they tend to throw that stuff to the wind. It's a very narrow view.
Like, for example?
Thai, the Philippines.
I mean the actual words and what do they represent? Because words represent something.
Oftentimes that's a gender concept.
No, I mean specifically, what do they refer to?
Someone who does not fit inside the male or female bracket or any other gender identity outside of that.
So are we actually talking about gendered language, gendered insult? Because
it's a specific gender inside the society.
And it's getting pretty weird.
It's hard to describe, especially with a Anglo-American cultural context. But the only thing I could find it applicable to is something akin to non-binary or even the neo-pronouns, where it's something where it's beyond just a physical descriptor, but it's all a social descriptor. But it's used in the same way as a gender.
What? Are you sure you're not talking about an insult? Because I mean, the phrasing that I can think of, because I've studied several languages myself. Granted, I can't say I'm a master of any one, to be fair. Not even English. Gosh dang it. Anyway, no, what I mean is that a descriptor is a description of something, which, despite any language is language. Even the people speaking it, I mean, it's a descriptor of something. So you're saying that there's other gender language, but for one, I would have to ask, do those words actually apply to the quote-unquote Western idea of what that even is? Because at the end of the day, if you speak to somebody from Africa and you talk to them about this, and I personally have, because I actually have a couple of pen pals from there, they would look at you like they wouldn't be very nice about it because it doesn't really make a lot of sense to them.
Okay, one thing I would like to get into is that it depends on where you are, where your friends are from in Africa as well, because this is a culture to culture thing.
One's in Kenya, one's in Sabek, I think.
There's it's hard to describe what these are because they don't fit into what we normally conceptualize as gender, but they are third gender.
How do you know? How do they apply to gender if they actually don't fit in that?
Because you're thinking about gender purely in the terms of sex.
Well, I'm thinking it of as a descriptor.
Okay, it's getting into a deadlock kind of
basically where it's as a descriptor, it's someone who would be fulfilling a social role that is equivalent to a gender, where they are no longer viewed as masculine or feminine, but as a third thing that operates separately, Chibados, which is from some group in Angola. Third gender, they are oftentimes born male, but they also lived mostly among women, and they would walk and dress like women. They were involved with basically spiritual matters and military decisions, and they were just kind of their own caste. And they oftentimes self-referred to as grandmother.
Now, the first thing that comes to mind whenever I hear this is actually an insult, and it comes from Hawaii, and it's maho, which low-key is basically become the Hawaii, I guess is basically the Hawaiian version of calling someone a she-male or something.
Well, these people are viewed as socially important. Like the queen, Queen Nzinga had 50 of these chabados in her court because they were that politically important.
But is that an actual gender thing, or is that literally just like a concept of their position or how they actually live?
What is gender but not a position?
Well, it's a, like I said, it's a descriptor. It's literally
what does it describe? If you're just describing male or female, we have terms for male and female compared to man and woman, right?
I think what this goes back to is whether or not we consider gender separate from sex, and I think Tetsuke and I don't, and you, Watercube, do, and that's where we're reaching our impasse.
I believe everything is social. I believe that ideals are more powerful than the material matter. Like, you guys are both materialists over here.
Well, I mean, I build things. I mean,
no, I want to mean like philosophically, like Marx.
Well, and I hate pulling my autism card because I hate using it as a crutch, but I am. When I think of non-binary, and I think of it as this very, what's the word I'm looking for? Abstract, what's this very abstract, what's the word I'm looking for? Not
concept?
Abstract. Not concept. It's another descriptive term. This, intangible, this idea of an identity and a social identity based off of things that are intangible, things that I can't see, can't perceive, and it's honestly nightmarish to me.
I mean,
because the idea of being able to improperly describe someone by things I can't physically perceive, and this end up being a social issue or even an insult or something I could get in trouble because God forbid I not be able to read someone's mind and be able to predict how they feel on the inside.
Isn't that just them being delusional, though?
Like, to call it delusion is just, like, is language delusional? Because this is all linguistic at the end of the day. Linguistics is inherently idealist. It's something that is not material. They are words. They are something that we use to apply to symbols. There's linguistic and then there's the symbolic. Like, words exist first before the symbols we apply them to, because it is something that's completely cognitive, completely immaterial, and oftentimes changes and fluxes around. That's why language always evolves, because it's idealist.
No. I
would say it's more simple than that.
I would disagree. Things have to exist for us to make words for them, whether they be ideas or physical objects. We have to have a thing to come up with a word for, because we don't just come up with words out of the ether. Words are meant to describe something or represent something.
A lot of words come out of the ether, though.
Has to exist before the word does.
Like, the thing is, it's with the human mind, is that there are the physical things that we apply the linguistic words to, but there are also things that are completely just out there and completely idealistic. Like, and this goes back and has been a case in human society since Plato. Like, Plato's whole point was an ideal form with the idea of the realm of ideas.
And what did Diogenes say to Plato in regards to it when he pointed out the emptiness in the cup? He said the cup is empty. What is the ideal form of emptiness? What is the ideal image of nothingness?
Yeah,
you cannot idealize nothingness, because even nothing is something. So there is no ideal form. Even the words and ideas, even the words we use to come up with the ideas in our head, the idea has to exist first. The idea must be tangible before we can put that tangible idea into words.
I disagree there.
The thing still comes before the word.
Like, the thing that comes before the word to some extent. Like, It's a flux. Like Bate goes into base materialism, where there's a flux between the idealistic and the materialistic, where the idealism informs the material as much as the material informs the ideal. It's also the basis of dialectical materialism with Marx, where there's a constant conflict on what we view as materialistic and idealistic.
Well, like materialistic is things that exist. Idealistic stuff is things that we make up in our head.
It goes beyond that, because like almost every thought we have is idealistic.
It can, but at the end of the day, like let's take the basic concept of altruism. Altruism in and of itself is an instinct. It's something that exists, like animals actually do it. So it has a name. We've given it a description, something where an animal puts itself in harm's way to, basically say, hey, something's coming. Let's get the fuck out of here. And, pardon my speech. And they wind up possibly being a target. But in the reverse, like, you have, that's something that exists. But then you have the ideas beyond that, like, for example, humans being, fully caring of humans, when in actuality, that's not true. Humans can care for humans, but we don't do it for everyone. Oh, and
Frederick's gone.
Gentlemen, as much as I'm enjoying this conversation, and this is a really good conversation, I must inform us that we are going on an hour and a half, and I remember that this was going to be a short episode, and I've been up since 4:30.
I was actually very surprised y'all did this. I saw it out of the corner of my screen when I actually got to sit down.
Yeah, I forgot to announce it. I apologize for that, but it was in a very run-of-the-mill that we were going to do it today instead of tomorrow, because I wasn't going to be in town to record tomorrow.
That's fair.
But, yeah, I don't want to stop your conversation mid-conversation. I'm just saying, can we wrap it up? Can we, have some concluding arguments, please?
No, because I'd have to explain a lot of fucking philosophy to prove my point.
Well, alright, so shall we say this, Tetsuke, Watercube, shall we save this conversation for another week and come back to it?
I think that'd be good.
Sure.
How about you two get together, pick a weekend, and we'll make that weekend a special episode just for this debate.
I'd have to read more Hegel in the meantime. Got to study up. It's a matter of respect.
I mean, I'm just very simplistic, so yeah.
But the world's not simplistic. The world isn't a simple mechanism. There's a lot going on in the world, and especially human psychology. Like that's the thing that we're dealing with constantly is the human mind, and it's a complex mechanism.
I would disagree with that on the basis simply because things are simple. Things can be complex, but at the end of the day, like our very existence is fairly straightforward. You're born.
I would say the state of the human condition is mankind taking complexity out of very simple things. That is within nature, the human condition. We make things more complicated than it has to be. That's just who we are as a species.
And that's a result of our psychology. So when we interact with the world via our psychology, things will be complex, especially when it came down to stuff like linguistics, gender identity, and so on. Those things will be inherently complex and philosophical arguments because it has to do with how our mind interacts with the world.
Well, we make it complex.
Well, you can't make it simple because we make it inherently complex on a subconscious level. It's something that is completely in the ego and superego. It's something that is in the most basic parts of our psychology is we yearn for complexity because we yearn for meaning. And complexity provides meaning.
I am psychologically driven to simplify everything just to make life easier. Because it takes too much effort to deal with it otherwise.
Yeah, just build a chair, build a table, fasten a windowsill.
It's so much easier that way.
It's easier, but it also, at the same time, goes against the human social organization. If we didn't get complex, we wouldn't get where we are now.
I'm autistic. My entire psychological state is to go against the human social psychological state. I will rage against this world.
I mean,
Monarchist, I would love to have you up, but I'm getting ready to wrap this up, please.
Okay, yeah, let's wrap this up. Let's go. I think I said my piece about the complexity of the world and especially human psychology. I think that's really what my argument boils down to.
Mine's just that life is ultimately just simple. We born, we live, and we die. Everything outside of that is something that we create, or at least we describe in such a way.
I think we create. Like, we create and we envision. We view it through the lens of our psychology, and our psychology makes things complex. Even the concept of death we make complex by innovating an afterlife to explain what happens beyond death.
Yeah. We try to make things more than what ultimately sometimes they are, really. And to the betterment to some extent, but it can be to our detriment in a lot of ways. And like the very state of our societies, like the way they are, and like history is a big proponent of that. But like I said, when it comes right down to it, at least for me, it's fairly simple. I exist, I can do things to help myself survive, and at some point I'll kick the bucket and be eaten by worms. But yeah, that's about it.
I resist complexity only on the base, or not complexity, of simplicity, because that's where ideology oftentimes takes the reins, especially the ideology that we grow up in. Like, that tends to inform that simplicity. Like, the simplicity of the feudal era is going to be way different from the simplicity of the liberal capitalist era. And that is inherently informed by our psychology, how we view the world, because we are fed this ideology from birth till grave.
All right, well, without further ado, wrap this up. I can get this downloaded, edited, processed, and then maybe go to sleep at a decent time. But it's looking like that's not happening. Oh well, it was worth it. Sleep is for the weak, and I don't have anywhere to be tomorrow, so I can sleep in as much as I want. Anywho, please bow your heads and pray in the manner you are accustomed, in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us of our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Heavenly Father, protect us until we meet again. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you all for your patronage and for supporting the Monarchists of America and this Monarchist Minute podcast. We will see you next weekend, same place, same time, or we will see you on YouTube if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening to this on any of our streaming services where we have this podcast available. We hope to see you then and there. May God bless you. May God bless the United States of America. Thank you, and good night.